Okay, so President-elect Trump has chosen South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem to be the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
A very interesting choice.
Definitely, and maybe a name a lot of people aren't that familiar with yet.
Right.
So we're going to take a deep dive and get to know her a little bit better in this episode.
Sounds good.
So let's start with her background, because she's not your typical politician.
No, not at all. I mean, her story starts on a family farm in South Dakota.
Yeah, really far from like the halls of power in D.C.
Yeah, and I think that upbringing really shaped her.
In what way?
Well, when she was young, her father died in a farming accident.
Oh, wow.
And it forced her to leave college and take over the family business.
That's a lot to handle at a young age.
It is. It speaks to her resilience and her work ethic.
And I heard she was also a rodeo queen contestant.
Yes, that's right. She's definitely a unique story.
It seems like she's always been willing to break the mold.
Definitely. And you see that in her political career, too.
How so?
Well, she served in the South Dakota legislature first, then went on to the U.S. House of Representatives, and then eventually became governor.
So a pretty steady climb through the ranks.
Yeah, but it hasn't been without its bumps in the road.
What do you mean?
Well, there have been some ethics complaints against her,
Okay.
some controversial statements that have made headlines,
Mm-hmm.
and at one point she was even banned by all 9 Native American tribes in South Dakota.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
It is. She's definitely not afraid to ruffle some feathers.
And then, of course, there's the pandemic, which really put her in the national spotlight.
Right, she became a symbol of resistance to lockdowns and mask mandates.
The real lightning rod.
Yeah, she was praised by some for her stance, but also heavily criticized by others.
So a divisive figure.
Definitely. And then there's her relationship with Trump.
Right, she's a very strong supporter of his.
Yes, she endorsed him early on in the 2024 race and was one of his most vocal defenders throughout the campaign.
So that loyalty could be a big factor in how she approaches Homeland Security.
It's certainly something to keep in mind.
And speaking of Homeland Security, she's been pretty outspoken about her views on immigration.
Yes, she's very much in line with Trump's thinking on that.
She wants to tighten border security.
Crack down on illegal immigration.
And create what she calls a safer America.
Right, and she's not just talking. She actually took action on this as governor.
What did she do?
She deployed the South Dakota National Guard to the U.S.-Mexico border to support Texas.
Wow, so she's willing to put her words into action.
It seems that way. So we've got a picture starting to form here.
A woman who's not afraid to take a stand.
Who's fiercely loyal to her allies.
And who's willing to make tough decisions.
Even if those decisions are controversial.
Exactly. Now, before we move on to her time as governor, I want to touch on something else.
Yeah, with that.
Her personal life.
Okay.
She recently released a memoir called No Going Back.
I've heard of it.
And there's a story in there about her having to euthanize her family dog, Cricket.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that.
It really resonated with a lot of people.
It did. It was a difficult story, but it showed a different side of her.
Her compassion.
Her vulnerability.
Right. And then there's that whole strange episode with the story about her meeting Kim Jong-un.
Ah, yes, the one that was later retracted from her book.
Yeah, what was that all about?
It's hard to say. It's kind of a mystery.
It makes you wonder about the line between truth and spin sometimes.
Especially in politics.
Right. So we've got this complex figure here.
Yes. Someone who's both tough and tender.
Who's been praised and criticized.
And who's definitely not afraid of the spotlight.
So the question is, what kind of Secretary of Homeland Security will she be?
That's what we're going to explore next by taking a closer look at her time as governor.
Stay with us.
All right, so let's dive into her time as governor and see if we can glean any insights into how she might approach Homeland Security.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Well, one area that's always relevant to Homeland Security is energy policy.
Energy policy. Okay, how so?
Well, Homeland Security is responsible for protecting critical infrastructure, and that includes our nation's energy grid.
Makes sense. So what's Noem's track record on energy?
It's kind of interesting, actually. On the one hand, she's a big supporter of traditional energy sources like oil and gas. She's often sided with industry groups and pushed for policies that benefit fossil fuels.
But South Dakota has also seen a lot of growth in renewable energy during her time as governor.
You're right, especially wind power, so it's a bit of a mixed bag.
So is she a pragmatist when it comes to energy?
It's tough to say for sure. Maybe she's just playing to different audiences depending on the situation.
I guess we'll have to see how she approaches energy policy on the national stage.
Exactly, because her decisions could have big implications.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to another hot button issue.
All right.
Gun control.
Ah, yes. Noem is a staunch Second Amendment supporter.
Right. She's consistently opposed any efforts to restrict gun ownership.
In fact, she signed legislation making South Dakota a constitutional carry state.
What does that mean exactly?
It means people in South Dakota don't need a permit to carry a concealed handgun.
Wow, so she's really taken a strong stance on gun rights.
Yes, and it aligns with her broader philosophy of limited government and individual liberty.
But it also puts her at odds with people who are calling for stricter gun control measures.
Especially in light of all the gun violence we're seeing.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in her role as Homeland Security.
Right, because her agency will be tasked with preventing terrorism and mass shootings.
Will she focus more on border security and immigration enforcement?
Or will she also address domestic terrorism and gun violence within the U.S.?
These are tough questions with no easy answers.
Definitely. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about healthcare.
Healthcare. Okay. It doesn't seem directly related to Homeland Security.
Maybe not at first glance, but it's definitely connected to national security and the well-being of our citizens.
I see your point. So what's Noem's stance on healthcare?
She's been a vocal critic of the Affordable Care Act.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's called for its repeal and replacement many times.
And she also opposed expanding Medicaid in South Dakota.
That's right. She argued that it would be too expensive for the state.
But her critics say that her stance on Medicaid expansion limited access to affordable health care for a lot of people.
Especially in rural areas. So again, it raises questions about her priorities.
Will she prioritize market-based solutions over government intervention in health care?
Even if it means some people might fall through the cracks.
Or will she take a more holistic view?
Recognizing that a healthy nation is a more secure nation.
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered energy policy, gun control, and healthcare.
All important issues that could give us clues about how she might approach Homeland Security.
Now I want to talk about her leadership style.
All right.
What kind of leader is she?
Well, if her time as governor is any indication, she's not afraid to make tough calls.
Like her decision to keep South Dakota open during the pandemic.
Exactly. She faced a lot of backlash for that, but she stood her ground.
It shows she's a strong and decisive leader.
Some might even say stubborn.
But it also makes you wonder if she's always open to other perspectives.
And then there's her loyalty to Trump.
Right. Will she be able to challenge him if she disagrees with him?
Or will she just go along with whatever he wants?
It's a question of independence versus loyalty.
A delicate balance for any leader. All right, let's talk about how she communicates.
Okay. How does she connect with people?
Well, she's got a certain folksy charm that people seem to respond to. She often talks about her rural roots and her experience as a rancher.
It makes her relatable.
Right. And she's also very active on social media.
Especially on X.
Yeah, she uses it to bypass traditional media and speak directly to her supporters.
But she's also been criticized for her rhetoric sometimes.
Especially when it comes to sensitive issues like immigration and race.
Like her comments about Native American tribes.
Right. It's a communication style that can be both effective and risky.
It can energize her base, but it can also alienate people.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how she navigates that on the national stage.
Especially in a role as sensitive as Homeland Security.
Now let's step back for a minute and think about the historical context.
Okay.
Noem is only the second woman to be appointed Secretary of Homeland Security.
That's right.
And she's taking on this role at a time when political polarization is incredibly high.
And when threats to national security seem to be growing both domestically and internationally.
It's a lot to handle.
It is. She's facing some unprecedented challenges.
We don't know for sure if her background and her leadership style will prepare her for all of this.
But one thing's for sure, it's a significant moment in American history.
And it's something we should all be paying attention to.
All right, so we've spent this whole deep dive getting to know Kristi Noem.
Yeah, really trying to understand her background, her experiences, her beliefs.
Right, and I think we've learned a lot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
She's a complex figure.
To say the least.
Someone who's full of contradictions, but also someone who's clearly very driven.
So the big question is, what can we expect from her as Secretary of Homeland Security?
Well, if her past is any indication, I think we can expect her to prioritize border security and immigration enforcement.
Yeah, she's already said that those are top priorities for her.
Right, and she's brought in Tom Homan, Trump's former border czar, to advise her.
So it seems like we're going to see a continuation of Trump's hardline approach to immigration.
Possibly even a more intensified version.
What do you mean?
Well, she could increase border patrols, step up deportations, crack down on sanctuary cities.
She's also expressed some pretty strong views on refugees.
Right. She's skeptical about accepting them, which suggests a potential shift in U.S. refugee policy.
So beyond immigration, what else might be on her agenda?
Given her conservative worldview, I think it's safe to say that she'll emphasize law enforcement and national security.
Even if it means some impact on civil liberties and privacy.
It's possible. We might see some of the debates about surveillance and data collection resurface.
And what about her social conservative views?
Yeah, those could come into play too. Yeah. She might use her platform to advocate for those causes, especially in areas like education and healthcare.
She's not afraid to challenge federal mandates and push policies that align with her personal beliefs.
Right, but it's important to remember that we're just speculating here.
Of course we don't have a crystal ball.
Exactly. She might surprise us. She might moderate her positions on certain issues.
Maybe she'll try to build consensus and find common ground.
Or she could double down on her convictions and use her position to reshape the country according to her vision.
I guess only time will tell.
That's the nature of politics. It's unpredictable.
But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
Kristi Noem is someone who's going to make an impact.
Definitely. She's not going to shy away from the spotlight.
And she's not going to back down from a fight.
So buckle up. It's going to be an interesting ride.
That's a great way to put it. So to wrap up this deep dive on Kristi Noem,
what are the key takeaways?
I think the biggest one is that she's a complex and controversial figure.
With a track record that suggests she'll bring significant changes to Homeland Security.
And those changes could have far-reaching consequences for all of us.
So it's crucial for everyone to stay informed and engaged.
To think critically about the issues and to hold our leaders accountable.
Because ultimately the future of Homeland Security and the future of our nation are at stake.
Well said. So that's it for our deep dive this week.
We hope you found it insightful.
And maybe even a little bit thought-provoking.
As always, we encourage you to continue learning, questioning, and diving deep.
Until next time.